budget for next year. And in particularly at this time, I want to look at the new literacy initiative that we're talking about. The budget is basically a statement of goals translated into revenue and expense projections over a set period, normally a year. It gives you a framework that allows you to provide sort of optimal services to children, but at the same time staying within your resources. I mean, most organizations have an established fiscal year, whether it's calendar or fiscal, established by law, really. And the budget cycle is simply projecting revenue and expenses over that period. In trying to establish the relationship between programmatic goals and the budget, the center director would establish their programmatic goals, then create a budget to try to fund it. And there's usually a tension, as you sometimes have to trim your goals, or you may have to be aggressive in seeking your funding to achieve it, so that interplay occurs. Well, in a budget, there are three main broad categories. Personnel, essentially comprises salaries and fringe benefits. Variable expenses and fixed expenses. Childcare is very labor intensive, so that inevitably personnel expenses will consume 75 to 80% of your budget. In creating the personnel budget, you have to abide by staffing ratios. There's particular regulations in terms of the ratio between teachers and student, so you have to account for that. Because of that ratio, you also have to account for substitute time for compensated absences. In addition to salaries, you then have to look at fringe, sort of mandatory fringe like payroll taxes, things like health insurance, dental insurance, if you're lucky, retirement. So personnel is a real combination of trying to project salaries and fringe benefits. In this particular industry, most of your budget goes towards that.
Want to use the green one? The green page? Want to use this one?
A variable expense, generically, would be an expense that varies with revenue. Some examples of variable expenses: supplies, consultant, training, travel. Usually line items in a budget crunch to sort of give you the first pass at trimming costs. You have the most discretion there. Well, a fixed expense is an expense that does not vary with your revenue or utilization. A typical example would be facilities. If you lease a facility for a center, whether your enrollment is 95% or 60%, the cost is fixed. A lot of your fixed expenses fall into sort of the general category we call occupancy, which is rent, utilities, insurance, that sort of thing. There are multiple sources of income for a child care center. The main source is usually child care fees. The particular source of that has to do with your client mix. If it's primarily private, it may be parent fees. If there are lower income children, that may include a significant amount of public subsidies. In addition to the basic child care fee, some centers also provide optional services, and families that charge optional fees. Examples would be for nutrition, transportation, and after-hours care. Apart from your core funding, so sort of child care fees, a center can seek alternative funding. You can seek grants, federal, state, or local. You can certainly try to go to foundations for grants. Once you've entered the data into whatever budget template that you use, you would then present the first preliminary draft to the relevant participants, the managers at a budget meeting where people have an opportunity to make changes. If your desire is to have a particular operating margin and you fall short of it, you determine where you want to cut or where there are opportunities to enhance revenue. If there's opportunity to do more things, if you have a greater margin than you thought from your initial pass, then you may decide to build your reserve, or it may be an opportunity to do some creative programmatic initiative you always wanted to do but thought you were financially constrained. A small organization, you would have an accounting function. Sometimes what small businesses do, they buy a consultant. They may actually buy a consultant for X number of hours a month, whatever you think is appropriate and you can afford to keep your books in order. But you would need input from a financial professional to create the budget and clearly to do your month-to-month accounting.
I know this is a big item, but I'm wondering if we could also get a laminating machine with the paper supplies.
Okay, well, we'll try to get some grant funding for it. What we'll do is talk to them. There is a natural tension that occurs between expansive programmatic goals and available resources. And the budget provides a mechanism, a sort of discipline to bring your goals and ambitions in balance with your available resources.